And welcome to another episode of TiKun Olam, and I'm very excited today to be with my cousin Michael, and this week he's going to share with us the idea of the Kabbalah and how it relates to TiKun Olam with special reference to tzedakah. So this is going to be a very, very practical episode, something which everyone can learn from. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Michael.
Thank you, Rav Mashiach. This episode, I'd like to present, firstly, the concepts of Kabbalah. It's a little bit about its history, and the second half of the talk would be about the concept of tzedakah and how the simple act of tzedakah reverberates around the cosmos, according to Kabbalah, how powerful each act is. So, firstly, I'd like to give an overview about Kabbalah. We know that the translation of the word Kabbalah is that which is received. To receive something, you must be receptive. So you have to open yourself. You have to be able to create a vessel within yourself that will absorb what you want to understand and grasp, because it's a very esoteric subject. And then you can start to receive Kabbalah, to open yourself to a higher reality, to view the spirit within matter, to raise your consciousness to the point where your perception of reality is completely changed and the divine within all creation is revealed. Basically, Kabbalah can be split up into two or three types of Kabbalah. The theoretical, which concerns itself primarily with the inner dimensions of reality. The spiritual worlds, which encompasses your souls, malachim, and various other things. And the meditative, where the goal is to train the person who is studying to reach higher, elevated, meditative states of consciousness, and perhaps even a state of nuvuah, or prophecy, through employing the divine names and letter permutations and so forth. The third type of Kabbalah is the magical, which concerns itself with the altering and influencing the course of nature. It also uses divine names, incantations, amulets, magical seals, and various other mystical exercises. Therefore, the Kabbalah, wherein the aim was to reach the transcendental state of consciousness, never became mainstream, even though on an individual level there were Kabbalists, especially the Kabbalists from the 16th century Safed, who incorporated teachings as a way to achieve elevated states of awareness and consciousness. What we are left with is the theoretical dimensions of Kabbalah. The vast majority of Kabbalah that has been and is continuously being produced are all within the domain of the theoretical. The main body of this type of Kabbalah is the sacred work of the Zohar, the book of teachings of the 2nd century Talmudic mystic Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which was handed down from one generation to the next until they were published in the late 13th century by the Kabbalist Rav Moshe de Leon. The three stages of the development of the theoretical Kabbalah that's been developed throughout the ages in various stages. For practical purposes, the tradition of this style of Kabbalah can be divided into three basic stages. The first is the era of the publication of the Zohar, with the mystics of that and the following generation who articulated these teachings. The second would be the 16th century mystics who lived in the city of Safed. This particular period in history is referred to as the Great Kabbalistic Renaissance. The movement was steered by the profound and systematic teachings of Rav Moshe Cordovero, known as the Ramak, who lived in the 16th century, and particularly by the teachings of Rav Yitzhak Luria, who was the Arizal, he was known as, and also the Rabbi Yitzchak Ultimately, the third development of the Kabbalah was with the birth of Rav Yisrael ben Eliezer, who died, I think, in 1760, known as the Baal Shem Tov, the master of the good name, who was the founder of the Hasidic movement, which in a direct or indirect way has steered all of the other mystical movements until this present day. One who has only seen glimpses of the theoretical Kabbalah, like the novice, tends to view it as writing replete with fantasy, strange happenings and images, fantastical mythical landscapes, seemingly irrational, unrealistic, and unrelated to reality. Opening the classic work of theoretical Kabbalah, the Zohar, one is amazed at the author's imagination, but perhaps the fascination ends there. It seems to the novice to be a book of fantasy, nothing more. The author of the Zohar, the main body of Kabbalistic thought, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, was the first to describe the divine presence and our relationship with the Ein Sof. In the Zohar, we find such strange and fantastic tales, such mythical and mystical configurations and images that we can hardly believe. In the 16th century in Safed, the city of mystics, the Kabbalah began to take on a more comprehensive, detailed form and analysis. Patterns and systematic thought processes began to appear in Kabbalistic literature. Ultimately, with the birth of Hasidic movements, Kabbalah has come to its full fruition. Hasidism is the mystical movement founded by Rav Yisrael ben Eliezer, the Baal Shem Tov. He brought the image of the Creator into reality. No longer were these mystical concepts far-fetched and unrealistic. Rather, they became a concrete part of our everyday lives, affecting every facet of creation. Heaven was brought down to earth. The purpose of Kabbalah is fraught with misconception. A popular misunderstanding is that the study of Kabbalah is meant to transform one into a psychic, or perhaps a clairvoyant, capable of miraculous and otherworldly abilities. This, however, is a misconception. The ultimate purpose of the study of Kabbalah is the perfection of the self, which is a form of TiKun Olam, making the self into a better, more expanded individual, more transcendent, more attuned to the essence and roots of one's soul. This is what Kabbalah comes to offer those who truly wish to receive it. Now, though the core of all Kabbalah is the distinct goal and objective to draw down the infinite light of Ein Sof from the abstract and anchor holiness into one's day and today reality. And the early Kabbalists were known as I quote, men of toil. Their exertions were not of the physical sorts. Rather, they laboured throughout their lifetimes to improve themselves and elevate their level of consciousness to the point of spiritual perception of reality. With the arrival of the Baal Shem Tov, this notion took on a new and fresh meaning. With the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, the path became ever so clear as to how this refinement could be achieved. To know Kabbalah is to live Kabbalistically. Kabbalah is likened to the proverbial tree of life. It is a study of life, and just as life cannot be studied through a textbook, but through living itself, so too the study of Kabbalah is effective only through the practicality of its teachings in our everyday lives. Kabbalah studied as a textbook subject is one who studied love, yet never experiences it for himself. The Kabbalistic way of character refinement. It's a work of great masters in the theoretical side of the Kabbalah, to notice that the mass majority of the texts do not deal at all with transformation of character. While it is true that Hasidic mystical literature is geared towards taking the highly theoretical and relating it to one's day-to-day life, the Kabbalah itself seems not to care so much about the person, but rather it seems to be interested in explaining the heavenly spheres, the malachim, the souls, and various other esoteric concepts, and not how one is to conquer one's negative behavior. Notwithstanding, this does not imply that the Kabbalah is not interested in the person. On the contrary, in fact, there are countless remarks throughout all the works of Kabbalah regarding the negativity of bad character traits, such as anger, laziness, depression, and others. The harshest condemnation of depression, anger, and other negative counterproductive emotions are found within the works of Kabbalah. Yet, the Kabbalistic method of character refinement is quite a different approach than the approaches that we are accustomed to encountering. It is not a head-on battle of countering negativity on its own turf, but neither is it to overwhelm the negative with the positive. Its approach is to come from another vantage point and see things from another perspective. The primary objective of mystical thought is to make the person understand that there is nothing else besides Hashem, the infinite. Reading the various configurations, maps and diagrams of the Kabbalah presents the person that is supposed to be awakened to consciousness that all that really exists is the Ein Sof. There is a feeling tone that is to be aroused when we penetrate the truths of Kabbalah, and that is the feeling that the world as we tend to perceive it as separate, independent of a creator, is but an illusion, and in reality there is nothing other than the infinite light. Having this notion in mind, consciously or even subconsciously, we are then able to conquer all of our personal negative emotions and traits. The ego and the false sense of self as the source of all negative emotions. Rav Yelahu ben Moshe de Vidas, a 16th century Kabbalist, deposits that there are three primary negative traits, which may be considered the principal traits from which all further dissension occurs. They are haughtiness, stubbornness, and anger, all of which claim origin in the same source, that is, the ego. Ego is the fountainhead from which all negativity stems. The core of all corruption is that false sense of ego, which lives in an incessant state of what it thinks will cause its survival. It is the ego which gives rise to all negative emotions. For example, when a person becomes angry, it is the ego's way of showing its objection that is not happy. The ego, when it feels it is threatened, is the one who protests, "How can you do this to me?" which arouses the anger. The fear of annihilation is the constant condition with regards to the ego. Anger is but a manifestation of a person's preoccupation with his imaginary presumptions of survival. The total involvement with the illusory self is the root of all negative emotions. By overcoming this false sense of self, which stems from one's false estimation of survival, one's negative emotion is conquered. Through the study of the Kabbalah, we come to the realization that the false sense of self and ego is but a masquerade of our true and inner dynamics, our transcendent soul. The feeling tone we get when contemplating Kabbalah is that all that exists is Ein Sof. We ought to feel this on a cosmic level and then understand it on our own level. Consequently, the illusion of separateness and ego as a result, the preservation of this mirage will slowly begin to fade, and with it will fade the negative emotions, which is the ego's manifestation. In the place of seeing the ego as a real enemy who needs to be engaged in battle in order to be overcome, we begin to realize that there is nothing besides the light, and everything else is simply a concealment of that truth. Such is the Kabbalistic approach for self-perfection. It does not deal with all the negative head-on, nor does it deal with it at all. Rather, it goes to the source of all problems, the ego, the I, and by extension the entire physical reality, and it demonstrates how, in fact, these seemingly independent realities are but a camouflage. By realizing this, our negativity is more easily overcome. And so I'd like to move, that's a basic overview, although it's pretty complicated.
It is quite a complicated subject, I agree, but I think the way you've presented it here is actually quite user-friendly. It's quite an achievement that you've brought this extremely complicated technical subject down to a level that we can definitely get something out of.
Well, we can look at the concept of Kabbalah and think, how can I understand it? How can I involve myself in it? How can I relate to it? But the next section we'll talk about the concept of tzedakah, which is integral to the machinations of Kabbalah and all of these processes that seemingly flow throughout the cosmos. So, regarding tzedakah, I want to quote Rav Menachem Nachum of Chernobyl in his Hanhagot Yesharot. He says, "Tzedakah is the root of life. When you give to others, you raise the sparks from their broken state, and you elevate your own soul. The word tzedakah contains within it the word tzedek, righteousness. In acting as a tzaddik, a righteous person, you become a holy spark of the cosmic tzaddik, i.e. God, and you help elevate tzedek from poverty and exile. Here is the idea. By carrying out a holy deed or an act of life-sustaining tzedakah, you redeem a spark from the evil forces and thus increase your own holiness. According to the 18th century Italian scholar Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto,
the
Ramchal, the physical world is connected to spiritual realms above, and these spiritual realms in turn influence the physical world. In his view, as developed in his Derech Hashem, Jews have the ability, through physical deeds and free will, to direct and control these spiritual forces. These spiritual forces include TiKun, rectification, and presence of the divine light, and chilchul, damage and evil. Not merely the absence of goodness and divine light, but its own force that is strengthened by the absence of goodness and divine light, and obviously every time you commit a sin. God's desire in creation is that God's creations ultimately will recognize God's unity and overcome evil. This will constitute the TiKun of creation. Jews have the Torah now and are aware of God's unity, but when all humanity recognizes this fact, the rectification will be complete. Since the lower realm is cosmically matched in the upper realm, by doing tzedakah to the needy below, one effects redemption and renewal of the parallel, needy aspects of the divine, the tzorek govara. The aspect of God in need of an outpouring of generosity is kingdom, malchut, which is the same term of which the prayer Aleinu speaks when it says praise for Tikkun Olam b'malchut Shaddai, fixing the world with God's kingdom. Here, Tikkun in this world is effected through tzedakah, and that act simultaneously fixes the upper world or kingdom as well. More radically, tzedakah resurrects that which is dead in the upper worlds, for the needy and poor are compared to the dead in the Talmud, and tzedakah revives the dead and returns to them their souls. The imagery used is the tree of death, for the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the earthly garden was the gateway to human mortality for anyone who ate from it illicitly. Tzedakah mystically turns the tree of death into the tree of life, even though in Bereshit chapter 3 they are described as two separate trees. But notably, they were both placed in the center of Gan Eden. So there seems to be some sort of connection why they were both placed in the center. Tzedakah is a redemptive act performed by people on earth that repairs the effects of the original sin in the Garden of Eden and brings all the world to life.
I think you could add into that and say that because there was so much selfishness in Gan Eden, because with the sin of the tree, taking the fruit and everything, it was all like me, and it was all like a blame game. I suppose the idea of tzedakah is connected that it sort of is a tikkun for that, because tzedakah is giving selflessly without any hope of any reward. So I think it's a very important point you made.
The Zohar interprets the mandate of Avraham to bring justice to the world in terms of the mundane daily act of giving tzedakah. In fact, this act brings wholeness to Hashem's name above, as we learn in Zohar part 3, 103b. It says, "Keep the way of Hashem to do tzedakah or mishpat," as we read in Bereshit 18, verse 19. Rav Shimon cried and said, "Woe to the children of Adam, who do not know and do not take care of the honor of their Lord, who makes God's name holy daily, those who give tzedakah to the poor." And it continues, "Come and behold the poor is attached to judgment, tzedek, and all that the poor eat is through judgment, whose place is called tzedakah. One who gives the poor tzedakah makes God's name complete above, for tzedakah is the tree of life. Tzedakah gives to tzedek, and they become united. One who effects an awakening below, it is as if he made the whole holy name. In a similar manner, according to actions below, so is the awakening above. So we see here the power of intentional tzedakah with good intentions, and how it reverberates all the way to Shamayim. Now, a little bit about Yitzhak Luria. In the 16th century, he envisions a highly unstable, dynamic drama of creations, destructions and restitutions on all levels of reality simultaneously. Both Rambam and the Luria share a faith in human activism, but the former uses political means and the latter meditative prayer. The mystical notion of TiKun celebrates the idea that human actions for the mystics, those are spiritual, ritual and verbal actions, can affect the cosmos and Hashem. Tikkun, meaning mending, restoration or reintegration, is the process by which the ideal order is restored, but lights of the divine emanation are incapable of bringing it about by themselves. God, in his wisdom, allotted this task to man, who thus has to play a major part in the great drama of restitution and tikkun. In brief, the Lurianic Kabbalah tells this story as a famous writer, Gershon Sholem, reconstructs it. Creation is a process by which God contracted the divine self, the Tzimtzum was the process, in order to make space for the world. God then emanated into that space divine light to be housed in 10 Sefirot, both as aspects of the divine presence and yet also vessels. When the vessels proved too weak to hold the light, the vessels shattered, resulting in the mixture of divine light with the klipot, or shards, from the vessels. That mixture is the introduction of evil into the world. Tikkun is returning those sparks to God, thus repairing the broken world and the levels of exile, spiritual, geographical, and political. Now, on the lower level of reality, Adam Rishon, who contains all the souls of humanity, could have redeemed the world and restored the divine light to its proper place. It was human responsibility to redeem God's exile, but his sin just recapitulated the exile. At Sinai, all Israel could have redeemed God and the world, but the sin of the golden calf repeated the original sin and sent Israel and the Shekhinah into exile. In Luria's era in the 16th century, when he calculated the 6th millennia messianic process of Tikkun had almost been completed, it was even more important to redeem the last sparks and not, God forbid, sin again. Doing mitzvot with the proper intentionality was the key to repairing the world. The Safed Kabbalists also instituted new rituals, including the practice of praying or studying at midnight or all night on the holy night on Shavuot, which is called the Tikkun of the night of Shavuot. Its purpose was to hasten the process of cosmic Tikkun. If these acts of Tikkun succeed, then the material and the political world will dissolve and all will return to the divine self. That mystical Tikkun Olam entails the end of time and the end of the world. And if I can quote from Lawrence Fine's book, The Physician of the Soul, he presents Zakah as an example of how the mystical attitude to the mitzvah is so different than the ethical one. And I quote, although there is reference in Lurianic texts to the actual giving of tzedakah, and we have seen that Luria himself was meticulous about this obligation, the focus of contemplative attention is devoted entirely to its theological consequences, i.e., the way human symbolic action affects the inner reality and will of God. As individuals who were encouraged to be ethically sensitive in conformity with rabbinic values, the Lurianic Kabbalists doubtlessly believed in the intrinsic significance of tzedakah, but the unmistakable inference one draws is that such mundane concerns were only the external dimension of deeper mystical goals. And yes, of course, the latter could not be satisfied except by means of the actual physical act, accompanied by the appropriate meditative intentions. So what are these intentions? The intentions perhaps for the L'Oreal were perhaps cosmic, but we can perhaps look at our intentions when giving tzedakah, because it seems that the intentions are the fuel. You're the machine. Yeah. The wheels are the wheels of the cosmos, but you're the machine. But the fuel is your intention. To have the right intentions when giving tzedakah. Yeah. So perhaps a few points I'd like to propose when you see homeless people or poor people in the street begging for money. You must first of all put yourself in their shoes. You must empathize with their conditions, their position in life, their view of time. You know, for us, we have plans weeks ahead. People are coming over for Shabbos. We're going on holiday in a few weeks. For a poor, oppressed, homeless person who's on the street, perhaps, they can only think a matter of hours what their next meal is going to be. They perhaps look at going to sleep as a relief from the day. It's a concentrated, stressful existence that perhaps each of us should perhaps think about and appreciate. What's the plight of the poor, and give tzedakah. I have one personal philosophy. If you're going to give tzedakah, although it's not always possible, try to give enough money so that the person can stop begging for that day. It may be £5, it may be £10, but if if you manage to let him stop begging, and maybe he can spend the rest of the day in the park. He knows that evening he's going to go to sleep on a full stomach. It's a big deal, for them. That's all that's important in life. And empathize, be respectful to the poor, because look, we give money. We pull out of our pockets some money, we give it to them. And it seems that in return, Hashem will bestow on us. It's not the reason why you should do it, but let's look at the facts. Hashem perhaps bestows something great upon you if you do it with the right intentions. So, for what is the poor man? What does he's basically providing you with Olam Haba, with the Olam Haba. So how great is his portion compared to ours? Ours, we do the simple act of perhaps being compassionate and just giving some money, but he's the one who's suffering. Yeah. But how great is his portion? To have respect for him. The beggars could be almost considered holy people because God sits with the poor and oppressed. So you must respect that. I personally go out of my way to show. If there's a gentleman sitting there, I will call him sir, and I'll talk to him for a few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, connect with the person, show empathy and show compassion. And believe me, you call someone who has never been called sir, you call him sir, he feels like a sir. His heart will be filled with this sort of glow that people care. Not just you throw a bit of change at him. They're people, and I think this is very important. You must have this kavanah but try and put yourself in their shoes. I think is very important, and you'll perhaps fulfill the mitzvah of giving tzedakah properly. And who knows what wheels you're turning through the cosmos?
That's amazing. Fantastic. That's an incredible exposition. I can see you've connected the idea of Kabbalah to tzedakah directly. I mean, this is something that any person can relate to, giving tzedakah. But you're right. We act on it as if it's almost like we're forced to do it because we feel guilty. You see somebody there, and you feel, but it's so much more than that. You're right. You have to realize that he is facilitating you doing this mitzvah. He's given a lot more. His Mesirat Nefesh for this, although it's thrust upon him, is much greater than you just taking some change and giving it to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Michael. That's great. So, until next week, we've got another episode next week, so we'll be very, very excited for that as well. So I'd like to thank you, Michael, very much.
Thank you.
Bezrat Hashem, we'll see you all next week. Take care.